Welcome to the podcast From the Alps to the Rockies. It's part of the celebration of 75 years of diplomatic relations between Switzerland and Canada. The Swiss Embassy in Ottawa and the Consulates General in Montreal and Vancouver are pleased to offer you a series of podcasts which will feature speakers from Switzerland and Canada. We will discuss various aspects of collaboration from the Swiss Alps to the Canadian Rockies.
Welcome to this edition of the broadcast From the Swiss Alps to the Canadian Rockies. My name is Urs Obrist. I'm the Senior Science and Technology Counselor at the Embassy of Switzerland in Canada. Our guest today is Michael Zaugg, who is originally from Obermumpf in the canton of Aargau and whose artistic journey has brought him from the green Jurassic Hills near Basel to the Rocky Mountains, where, since 2012, he has been directing the Edmonton-based professional choir Pro Coro Canada as principal conductor. Michael Zaugg is a renowned choral expert, not just as conductor and adjudicator, but also as innovative artistic director of renowned choirs around the world. In 2020, he was awarded the Outstanding Innovation Award for the program Choral Art at the Banff Centre and also holds an honorary doctorate from the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. Let's hear an excerpt of his choir Pro Coro Canada with a segment from Anton Bruckner's motet Christus Factus Est. If you are an ambitious chorister in Canada, I would surmise that chances are very high that your paths have crossed with Michael Zaugg, for he has been a great influence across the country, leading workshops, teaching new talents, and performing with a variety of high-achieving choirs. So, grüezi and welcome, Michael Zaugg.
Grüezi miteinander. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here on this podcast with the Swiss community in Canada.
Thank you, Michael. You are directing one of Canada's preeminent professional choirs today, but I would assume that this was not necessarily something on your mind when you started your early formation at the Teachers College St. Michael in Zug in order to gain a diploma to teach elementary and junior high school students.
Yes, who would have thought that a young boy from a small village in Fricktal would end up here on the Canadian prairies directing a choir. So I think that was quite a journey. Maybe there was something in my mind or in my fantasies when I was young and I was reading those epic novels by Karl May. I'm sure some of your listeners know Karl May and are thinking and dreaming about the Wild West or watching the movies back I was in the 70s and 80s. That eventually I would end up here in Edmonton, a short drive to the Rocky Mountains with the big plains and the fields and the forests and all that. Yeah, so my early path would have, or actually did lead me to become an elementary school teacher. We have teachers in our family. My mother is a teacher. My aunt is a teacher too. So there's the pedagogical element was always present in our family. And so early on in my teenage years, there was kind of a crossroads. I was interested in music. I always listened to music. I was playing instruments. There was music within our family. My aunt was an opera singer. My mom also played the organ and played piano. So there was a musical element in the family, and I played piano and saxophone. So at one point I thought, oh, I would like to study saxophone and become a saxophone player. And back in the day, I really had the idea to be in a big band and be kind of like a, type of Glenn Miller big band saxophone player. So that was a teenage dream of mine. But then there was kind of the crossroads where I ended up going to the Katholisches Lehrerseminar St. Michael in Zug for 5, almost 6 years. And that was a boarding school as internat. That's where I was for those years. Interestingly, it was a boarding school just for boys between the ages of 16 to 21. After that, I started teaching elementary school out in the eastern part of Switzerland, in the canton Thurgau, in Lütisburg, the Kindersdörfli Lütisburg, and that's where I taught for several years before making my way back to northwestern Switzerland, back to Basel, where I started my studies as a conductor and as a singer, as a tenor, and also in music education. So for me, the element of pedagogy and music was always together. Also, when I was teaching elementary school, I always did a lot of music with my kids, with the guitar, with the piano. There was a children's choir I was leading. I was always interested in singing and making music with people. And then at that point, I kind of went another way, another path, and started at the Musikakademie in Basel with my studies to actually become a professional musician.
You mentioned teaching at the children's village Lütisburg. That's a very special school, isn't it? Can you describe your work there a bit?
Yeah, the school, it's one has to imagine like a small village with about 12 to 15 houses. And these houses are inhabited by social workers and children between the age of 6 and 16. Now, these children, they might have had very unfortunate pasts. They might come out of families where they were abused. There might be orphans. And within the normal school system in Switzerland, it was considered that they were just like not able to be supported well enough. So they were brought to this Kinderdorf, this children's village, so to speak, where they had like one-on-one attendance, attention, and the teaching schedule, the curriculum was really shaped according to their needs. So when I taught there, I taught grades 3 and 4, 4 and 5, and so on. I only had 12 children in my class, and they all had specialized curriculums, and I had spent a lot of time on individual work and taking care and attention to one child in particular. We also had a lot of teachers, assistants there.
I would imagine music played an important role for kids with such challenges.
Yeah, one of the great experiences there, and I think for me also still a memory that keeps me sometimes going, and like this is why I make music, is that with children with those backgrounds, there was a lot of hard and harsh environments where they come from. Even on the schoolyard, they were not always very nice to each other, and we had to intervene in kind of sometimes very violent cases. But there was a phase at that school when two other teachers who were really interested in making music in a choir, and myself, we created this kind of environment, a choir, and we started gathering more and more of those kids. We started with about 12. In the end, we were over 30 and they just could voluntarily come to that choir. And so there was a phase where kids on the schoolyard actually would practice their songs and dance to their songs. And there was a huge shift from their usual behavior on the schoolyard. So I think that element of music made a big difference in their lives at that very moment. So I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to be there and try out and work with other great musicians in helping these kids to, maybe have for a couple of months, a couple of years, a different perspective of how they could be in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And going back to your career, as you've mentioned, you went to study choral conducting and vocal performance at the music school or the University for Music in Basel. What drove your shift from, let's say, your tenor aspirations more towards the conducting career?
Mm-hmm. I was always interested in singing, and my early, experiences in my early teens were with my aunt, who was singing operatic music, to learn that repertoire and sing and listen to operas and actually go to operas as a teenager. It was very fascinating to see those big operas. So I always had that kind of idea in mind. And throughout my teenage years, also at the boarding school in Zug, and then early on in my 20s, and I used to travel a lot for singing and go around Switzerland, actually Europe, for singing, visiting festivals, being part of choral festivals, singing there, getting to know conductors and composers and other musicians. So that was a big focus of me, the singing aspect. I sang in Switzerland in the Swiss Chamber Choir, which doesn't exist unfortunately anymore, and Swiss Youth Choir. I sang in the World Youth Choir. There was a World Chamber Choir I was part of. And that was very important, the singing within a group and feeling the harmony and being part of the performance aspect. Now, with my other kind of leg, being as a pedagogue, being a teacher, that just became stronger and stronger and stronger. And the idea, as I was just mentioning before, to help people gather, to create the possibility for people to sing together. And I experienced that in Lütisburg on a small scale with children. But then I experienced it also on a like broader scale, national and international, of bringing people together and singing, what kind of power that can have. And that doesn't matter if you're in Canada or Switzerland or New Zealand. It's the same all around. And so seeing that possibility and feeling like this is the thing I have to do to actually be the conductor and facilitate that possibility for other singers. Mm-hmm. And then it went from singing into being the professional conductor and just like getting as much training and as good a training possible in that field. As a pedagogue, I have a great background from this later seminar, St. Michael, because that education is fantastic. And then adding the musical education and aspect to that. So that's kind of like how the two came. And then the singing at one point just had to fall away because to do one really well, I just had to put the other one aside.
And then the next step, actually, with regards to conducting, led you to Stockholm. That's where you pursued studies or a postgraduate diploma in choral conducting at the very renowned Royal College of Music. How would you describe this period in Sweden?
Yeah, my time in Sweden was really fantastic, and I had early on in 1993, had some experiences with Scandinavian choral music, seeing concerts, meeting conductors, meeting composers. And that was actually before I even went to Basel to study to be a conductor. And that experience and seeing those performances was like, wow, that's amazing. That's what I want to do. This is kind of like the field I want to work in. I want to study with those people. I want to study that kind of music, and I want to sing in those choirs. That had a big impact on me.
Mm-hmm. And well, given the geography of countries like Sweden or Finland, a switch over to Canada wouldn't seem too much of a stretch, given the harsh winters in northern Ontario or northern Alberta. Nevertheless, what's brought you in the end? I think it was back in 2004, 2005, to start kind of picking up the suitcases and journey to North America. What brought you to?
Yeah, I think it was really adventure. It was adventure. My partner at that time was Canadian, and it was like, okay, let's explore a new country. After having been in Stockholm for 2 years, and it kind of really changed my perspective on things, on choral music, on work, on who I was as a professional musician. I thought, well, if I go back to Switzerland, I will go back into my old roles. I become again who I was before I went to Stockholm. But I changed a lot during the time in Stockholm. So, okay, I need a new ground to kind of be myself. I need a new environment to kind of put my roots down. And so at that point, it was Canada and it was Montreal. So it was October 2nd, actually. Yeah. Yeah, it was just about 16 years ago, arriving in Montreal at the airport and just actually staying in a bed and breakfast for the first couple of weeks. And the second day after my arrival, I drove to Ottawa and I had an interview with the cantata singers of Ottawa. And I was still very jet lagged at that time. So I drove there and had my interview, and then I was invited to do a full production with them in the following spring to kind of show what I could do and my musical ideas, and also for the choir to get to know me, and for me to get to know them and figure out, can I actually commute from Montreal to Ottawa on a weekly basis. And then that led into a partnership with that group in Ottawa for almost 10 years. And in that position, I did have, great memories from working with the Swiss embassy, working, for example, on a concert around music from the Alps. So there we had John Loretan, who has worked at the embassy, who played the Alphorn in one of our concerts. So we have great memories from those early days in Canada.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. Obviously, here at the embassy, we do know John Loretan very well. He's back in Switzerland now. But also the fact that he worked with cantata singers is well known here in the city. You also acted as the founder of the Montreal Choral Institute. So you left your mark on the east side of Canada already before heading over to Edmonton. When we look at the choral scene in general terms, and you kind of hinted at it already, when we compare the Swiss and Canadian choral scenes, so to speak, do you notice any major differences or similarities? What's your take?
Yeah, I think some of the major differences, I would say, is that here in Canada, there's a much larger network of children's and youth choirs. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we always have to keep in mind that if we compare Switzerland to Canada, it's almost comparing one country to one province in terms of size and people living here. So if you think of Edmonton as a city with 1.2 million people, and then Calgary, so that itself is already a big part of Switzerland. So we think about how many children's choirs are in this city, in Edmonton, youth choirs, and then taking that in terms of comparing to Switzerland. So there's a huge network and a huge investment into children singing. There was a research done about 4 years ago about Choral Canada, and Choral Canada is the umbrella organization of all the choirs here in Canada. And we found out that in Canada, there's twice as many children sing in choirs than play hockey. So we always think hockey is the Canadian sport, but it's actually singing, because there are many, many more people singing choirs than play hockey. So just to think about that. Now, another thing that goes in hand with that, the singing with children, youth choirs, is that in the public school system here in Canada, there's much less an emphasis on music and music education, whereas in Switzerland, at least what I remember from being an elementary school teacher, there was a lot of making music with children, elementary to high school. The cultural aspect, the musical, the arts aspect was weighted much higher than it is here in Canada. So the extracurricular activities of children here that's where the music and the singing comes into play. Then if you look at the adult singing, again, here in Canada we have about 15, 16 professional choirs. There is close to 4 million people singing in choirs here in Canada. So again, comparing that to the size of Switzerland, there is more activity in that sense, of course. So those are some similarities and also some differences. What we don't have here in Canada are these, really these jodelhörli. We don't have them here. So we don't have as much musical, singing activity that focuses on one specific traditional aspect. As in Switzerland, the yodel, you have a lot of jodelhörli. In Canada, what would be the equivalent of folk music, of folklore? We don't have that really here in Canada. So the singing is more going to the classical singing, or then maybe the popular style. So the kind of folk element of Canadian folk music is not as well developed, for example, as it is in Switzerland.
And this now basically leads me into your last and current stage of your journey. You are in Edmonton now, leading the Pro Coro Canada, as we mentioned, the professional choir. If you would have to describe this choir and its ambitions, what is the musical vision with this choir? I would assume they have to position themselves amongst many, as I said, professional choirs within the country.
Yeah, one thing that really drew me to this position very early on is that the founder, Michel-Marc Chervet, actually also studied in Scandinavia. So there's a connection over 40 years between this organization and the music from Scandinavia. So with Pro Coro, that's still part of what we do. We want to bring in music from Scandinavia, and with that, contemporary music. So over the last 8 years now that I have been working with the group, we really have focused on new music that's been written today or even tomorrow. We don't even know yet how it's going to sound. In that sense, we work a lot with young composer, with emerging artists who come and visit Pro Coro. They look at what we do, they listen to the choir, they study with me, they study repertoire, and then they write something new that nobody has heard before. And so we kind of have specialized a little bit in that field, that we present music that is really cutting edge. And part of that program at the BAM Center Choral Art, for which we won this Innovation Award, is also in that vein. We try new things. We try music with electronics. We try music with movement, with visuals, with movies and things like that, that here in Edmonton, Alberta, maybe has not been presented before with the choir. So we're trying as a choir to kind of bring the field of choral music a little bit forward and like push the edge. That's one thing that is part of our vision. And then within that, part of our vision is really to work with young artists, be they conductors, singers, composers, or also maybe in the management field. So we can say, this is how you work with a professional ensemble. There's not a lot of opportunities here to work with professional choral ensembles, so we provide that. And of course, we still have our general, program, our repertoire. We do a concert on Good Friday usually, where we sing a Passion by Bach or maybe a Requiem by Brahms. We have our traditional Christmas concerts and music, and maybe a spring concert here and that. So there is the traditional repertoire that we also perform.
And you kind of precluded my question. I was about to talk about new forms. You have mentioned the inclusion of electronics. I know a piece by a Catalan composer, Albert Guinevard, a piece called Mobilia la vita e mobile, which is kind of an ironic allusion to Rigoletto and the current use of mobile phones. Mm-hmm. There's spiritual works by people like Eric Eisenwalds from Latvia, you're certainly mm-hmm. familiar with, or contemporary, I would say at the time, progressive music by Canadian composer Murray Schafer. I'm sure that is then also part of your repertoire, and probably in a way also a demand of the current times. You have to be contemporary, no?
You have to be current, you have to be contemporary, and that's also sometimes a little bit of a curse. I mean, we're very happy and proud to have won an award for innovation, but once you're considered an innovator, what do you innovate next? Where do you go from there? So it's finding that new thing, finding the new music, and being open to any kind of sound that comes your way. So that's certainly an element with Pro Coro. And the composers you mentioned, they are all part of our program. We did about 3 years ago, we did a new piece by Murray Schafer. We actually performed it in Toronto first at Kerner Hall with the Vancouver Chamber Choir and the Elmer Eisler Singers. So 3 professional choirs together, this new large work by Murray Schafer. It was fantastic. And so those works are part of our program and part of choral culture in Canada, like the ideas that Murray Schafer had way before we thought we should go outside. It's really mind bending, and I love reading his books and just look at things from a different angle. And Eric's Asian Waltz, for example, too, he has kind of brought the tuned water glass to everybody's attention, where you just dip your finger in the water and you have this singing water glass, and that's part of the choral music now. Of course, with the pandemic we're finding ourselves in, we are very restricted in regards to what we can do and how we can do it, and we have to be innovative, not just what kind of music we do, but how do we do new music. And that's also a moment where new technology comes into play, like Zoom, for example, or other kind of video conferencing software, other ways of presenting our concerts online, presenting music outside. I was talking to a composer yesterday, and the piece that was conceived is to be performed on a big parking lot, for example, or outside on a field, and singers have walkie-talkies. So they goes back and forth with walkie-talkies. So we have to think really outside the box, and the box right now is very small because of the restrictions due to the pandemic. So it's a very small box, so we have to think outside in creative ways, in safe ways, in ways that kind of keep the protocols in mind and all that. So
you cannot actually have rehearsals in person at this point in Edmonton?
Oh, we do have rehearsals here in Alberta. The current limits are 15, and we rehearse with 4 people. So the 24 singers I have, divided in 6 groups. Every group has a soprano, 1 alto, 1 tenor, and 1 bass. And we just rehearse in groups of 4 with myself and maybe some other staff for 5, 6 people. And we sing with masks. So we have these specially made singer masks that are bigger, so we can breathe more. And also they're longer, so you can open your mouth more for singing. And we have these little separators between the singers, and we have air filters in the room. So we have all these measures in place that are recommended by the various health officials.
Just going back to the question of the composers, we've mentioned Murray Schafer. Amongst Canadian composers these days, I think one could name Iman Traminch or Stephen Chapman, Shrew Glick. Out in Edmonton, there's Laura Hawley as well. Do they write for you as well, or?
Yeah. Stephen, I haven't actually received any music from Iman Traminch or Stephen Chapman. We have performed their music, but they have not written specifically for us. Laura Hawley has written several pieces for us, and we have premiered some of her works. She's here in Edmonton. The generations I'm working with right now are the generation of Laura Hawley. So we would have her. We have Christopher Fulton, Cy Giacomin, Kathleen Allen, Tracy Wong. So there's a whole field of conductors who are kind of like mid career that we are working with, and we've been working with them for the last 10 years. So we have established relationships that are long lasting. And then we're also looking at really young composers, some that are just in their degrees, and they're in the 3rd year at university, and we work with them and help them develop their first piece, so their first voice they hear. But for example, in our next concert, so November 22nd, we will perform music by Healy Willan, who was a fantastic Canadian composer, and music by Stephanie Martin, also a composer from Toronto, who was actually at the same church as Healy Willan worked for many, many years. So those stalwarts of Canadian choral music, they're definitely part of our repertoire.
Mm-hmm. With regards to your forthcoming projects, you already mentioned the upcoming concert here in November, but what's the outlook for 2021?
So we are fortunate enough at Pro Coro Canada to have been able to offer a full season. We have 7 concerts on our program, plus another 4 extra, like smaller concerts. And these concerts are with groups of 4 to 8 singers. And you have to imagine it like a concert hall, and there's like 4 or 8 singers, and then they leave and another group comes in. So we can work with all the singers we have in the course of maybe 2 hours, but they only perform a little segment, and then they have to leave the building because they have to leave the space and we have to clean and everything. So we are able, just in terms of logistics, to work around a concert production, so we can provide work for all our singers and we can provide concerts. Now, what we have to add to that is we have to live stream it, because we cannot have audiences in our concert venues. So we have, over the last 2 months, like revved up a whole production team with live stream, so video and audio that we can go online. And we have created a kind of like TV channel online, Pro Coro TV, where you can go and watch these performances. So that's kind of what we have over the last 6 months created and invested in and restructured our productions. And just, yes, we had to be innovative and we had to be creative, and we came up with something that actually I don't think anyone in Canada in the choral world is doing right now. So we're kind of like the pioneers in to see it. Is this working? Is it not working? How do we make it work in terms of resources, money, people, and space? So that's very exciting, and I'm happy that so far it has worked. So knock on wood. And then I think that a year from now we will be in a kind of like more a normal performance, but the normal might still be what we do now. We just will perceive it as normal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's very great to hear that you keep the optimism up. I think during the first months of the crisis, a lot of people have spoken about the necessity to keep the arts going. People need arts, culture, music, particularly, obviously. And so hopefully during the upcoming darker, shorter days, music will keep the spirits up and people happy. Michael Zaugg, it was a great pleasure chatting with you on this occasion, and we look forward to hearing from Pro Coro Canada. I recommend people to look up your website and check out your TV channel as well. And thank you very much for being part of this broadcast.
Thank you very much for having me here, and I look forward to how this evolves, and I wish everybody good health and all the best for the rest of 2020. Thank you. Danke vielmals.